Good evening from the National Weather Service office in Lake Charles, Louisiana. I'm meteorologist Donald Jones, and yeah, it's that time of year again. It is still hurricane season. In fact, our hurricane season officially peaks on September 10th, and almost as if on schedule, we are looking at some possible tropical development in the Gulf of Mexico here, the southern Gulf of Mexico here, as we come through the upcoming week, and that is going to have the potential to have some impact across our area. I know we kind of got complacent a little bit. We went through a fairly long period of not a whole lot in terms of tropical activity out there, but there are actually several areas of disturbed weather that are being watched across the Atlantic, and now one in the southern Gulf of Mexico that is going to have the potential to develop over the next few days. It's not going to be something that's going to develop extremely quickly. This is something that we expect to develop over the next 3 to 4 days or so, but it is going to pose a threat to pretty much the entire Gulf Coast. Is going to have to keep an eye on this, but particularly the northern Gulf Coast is looking particularly susceptible to possible tropical conditions as we get into the middle and latter part of next week. We're going to talk about all that here over the next few minutes, and we're also going to answer your weather questions. So if you do have any questions as we go through our briefing, feel free to post them in our comments section, and we'll be happy to answer them just as soon as we wrap up our briefing. We're on Facebook, we're on X now, and we are on YouTube as well. So lots of ways to watch the briefing if you don't have one or the other. Let's go ahead and jump into it here this evening. And to start off by taking a look at the visible satellite, we were talking about, a lot of you were asking about the cold front that came through the area. We did have a cold front come through the area actually late last night into early this morning. That's what all of this area of cloudiness is. There's actually some showers and thunderstorms over towards the Lafayette, down towards the New Iberia area. It's mostly light showers right now, but that's still associated with this frontal boundary. That's what all this cloud cover is here across the northern Gulf right now. The area of disturbed weather that we're looking at for possible development is way down here in the southern Gulf of Mexico, in the area we call the Bay of Campeche. That's right up in this area here. Now, there's not really a center of circulation with the disturbance right now. In fact, it's just an area of cloudiness and showers and thunderstorms down that way right now. While all of this up here is actually a cold front. Cold fronts are normally drawn in blue, not red, but this you can kind of get the idea. And so it's kind of two separate distinct features right now. So don't look at this area of showers across the northern Gulf and think that's what we're talking about, because it's not. It's this area of disturbed weather way down here in the southern Gulf of Mexico that we're going to be looking at for possible tropical development over the next few days. You can see that area highlighted here in red. Let me go ahead and make this full screen for you so you can take a little bit closer look at it there. And this is the Hurricane Center's tropical weather outlook, and we are currently, move me out of the way here, forecasting a 70% chance of development here over the next 5 days or so now, or 7 days actually. Now, the most likely time frame that we're looking at for possible tropical development is going to be probably from late tomorrow into Monday, Tuesday time frame. That's going to be the time frame that we're going to see. If we're going to see something develop, that's probably when it's going to happen. And from there, as far as what areas are going to be impacted and when, that's of course going to depend on how strong the storm becomes and where it eventually tracks. But right now, we are looking at a fairly high probability of development. Most of our computer models, our reliable computer models, are indicating at least something to develop. Now, this could be something as low as a tropical depression or as high as a hurricane. It's not out of the realm of possibility. We could be looking at both right now. It's too early to say for sure what kind of intensity we're going to be looking at with regards to this system, but still a high probability of development. We're going to talk about what's working for and against this feature here as we go through the next few minutes here. Let me go ahead and come back to the full screen there. So I want to talk about what's actually going to be driving this storm. We'll start here, and I'll make it full screen again, but I want to kind of point out a few features here as far as what we're looking at. So what's going to be driving this disturbance if it actually does wind up developing? There's two things. One, we've got this cold front that's just offshore here off the coast. It's actually maybe right along the coastline here as we get into south central or southeast Louisiana. But here's a cold front. Here's my beautiful cold front drawing. There it is. All right, now we've got our disturbance down here in the Bay of Campeche. We'll just call that the rough center of circulation at the moment. And then we have an area of high pressure that's going to be over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, right around the Florida Straits or thereabout. Now, of course, areas of high pressure are going to have winds that are rotating clockwise around them, something like this. And then areas of low pressure, these winds are actually going to be moving roughly parallel to the cold front itself, so kind of from west to east across the Gulf of Mexico. Now, the storm system itself is going to be gradually moving to the north, being driven both by this area of high pressure in the eastern Gulf and into this cold front over the next few days. So the general trend is going to be for it to move north. Now, we could see a little bit more of a northwesterly component, possibly a northeasterly component, but the general idea is that we expect whatever develops, whether it's a hurricane or just an area of cloudiness and rain, the whole thing is going to be lifting to the north as we get into the early and middle part of next week. So for those of you along the Texas coastline, the Louisiana coastline, Mississippi, even Alabama coastlines, you're probably going to be the most likely to see any kind of significant impacts from this disturbance, depending on what it winds up being going forward. Now, those of you who watch my Facebook Live briefings or my other briefings through the years know that I almost never show what we refer to as the spaghetti plots, the series of computer models that are depicting the center of circulation. But looking earlier this afternoon, they're out there. That pretty much every meteorologist from here to Florida has shown them at one point or another. So I want to discuss them just briefly so we can talk about what this actually means and what this doesn't mean. So let me go ahead and make this full screen for you so you can take a nice, good look at it. Everybody take a big bite of spaghetti. All right, there it is. All right, so what we're looking at here essentially is a series of computer models. There's a lot of computer models out there that run constantly, some of them every 6 hours, every 3 hours, different time frames. And each one of those spits out a different model solution. These are just a few of them. These are what we call the operational models. So there's about a dozen of them or thereabouts on there at the moment. And each point, each one of those little white dots along those lines is where the center of circulation is expected to be at some point in the future. This goes out 5 days right now. Now, here's the kicker. There is no center of circulation right now. It hasn't actually developed yet. It's just an area of cloudiness and showers and thunderstorms. So what's happening is these computer models are trying to latch on to a center of circulation that doesn't actually exist yet. So that's why it's important that we take everything that computer models are spitting out right now with a huge grain of salt. Because as this storm develops, assuming it does develop, that center of circulation is likely not going to be exactly where the computer models think they are right now. So that's very important because differences of a few tens to hundreds of miles in center of circulation is going to have a huge impact on where the storm ultimately goes. So you take a look at this graphic right here and you see, oh, holy geez, all of the storms are coming right towards either southeast Texas or southwest Louisiana. Now, that very well may end up being the case, but as of right now, we're not putting a whole lot of faith in these model solutions because there is no actual center of circulation out there right now for the storm to pinpoint. So I want to show you this, and I want you to bear this in mind. Anytime you see one of these computer models and one of these spaghetti plots, at least right now, there's no actual center of circulation for this storm to latch onto. So these computer models, as that center of circulation actually develops, may shift significantly from where they currently are right now. Even if there was a well-defined center of circulation, computer models are still subject to large errors. So it's very important that you never look at one individual computer model. It's very important that we take a look at a consensus approach. And in this respect, that's where these spaghetti plots actually do very good. They show a large cluster, and the closer those models are clustered together, the more confidence we have in a forecast. But being as we don't actually have a center of circulation right now, I'm not putting a whole lot of faith in this eventual evolution. Now, the general trend is correct. Like we were talking about a minute ago, we are going to be looking at this storm gradually moving to the north. But don't look at that landfall point across southeast Texas or southwest Louisiana 5 days from now and be like, oh, now we got to start evacuations and all that stuff. We're not there yet. We're still 4 or 5 days away from any potential landfall. We're still probably 2-ish days away from any kind of center of circulation developing. So I don't want you to freak out yet because I know you're going to be seeing a lot of this going around here in the next couple of days. All right. Now let's talk about the different conditions and what this storm is going to be encountering as it goes across the Gulf of Mexico over the next few days. Sea surface temperatures are very warm. We're still in early September. We had that technical cool front that cooled us off a little bit, but not enough to talk about. And sea surface temperatures are always much slower to come down than air temperatures. That's because of the properties of water versus air. So we're still looking at temperatures, sea surface temperatures in the mid to upper 80s, so anywhere between about 86 and 88. Now we need at least 80 degrees for tropical cyclone development to be supported. So we're well above that, and we're going to be above that anywhere this storm eventually winds up going. So sea surface temperatures are definitely favorable for tropical development as we go through the next week or so with this system. Now, looking at the air, what's actually going on in the atmosphere, I'm going to make this full screen here because this is a pretty messy graphic, but I do want to show it to you. This actually shows the wind shear. This is the the winds that are actually blowing in the upper levels of the atmosphere that may be blowing against any kind of developing tropical system. And you can see the bright reds there across Louisiana, Texas, and the northern Gulf Coast. That's very strong wind shear associated with this cold front that just moved through the area. That's not going to move a whole lot over the next few days. This stationary or nearly stationary cold front is just going to kind of continue to sit right along the coast there. Further south across the southern Gulf of Mexico, you can see those blues and greens. That's much lower wind shear. Those conditions are much more favorable for tropical development, and that's where this storm is right now. So it's going to stay down there for at least the next couple of days. So it is in a generally favorable environment for tropical development. Now, as it moves north into that area of higher wind shear that we're expecting to remain in place, that may inhibit continued intensification. At least that'll be the hope as it approaches the northern Gulf Coast there later this week. Having said that, there's been instances in the past where we've had strong wind shear and we still have storms intensify just because the other conditions are still pretty favorable. So we're going to have to see how that evolves. But generally speaking, the next couple of days is going to be a very favorable environment for development. And then as it moves north up into the northern Gulf of Mexico, a less favorable environment. So we could see a situation where the storm intensifies more readily over the next, say, 2 to 3 days. And then as it approaches the Gulf Coast, may actually begin to weaken. That's kind of speculation. But at least based on the wind shear alone, that's kind of what we're looking at right now. Of course, that is subject to change. These are all computer models, and they do tend to change over time. The bottom line, though, is that regardless of any kind of development, we're going to see probably quite a bit of rainfall across the region, because not only are we going to be dealing with this tropical system, that cold front that we were talking about, that stationary cold front across the northern Gulf, is still going to be kind of over the area. So we're going to be looking at that rain, that tropical moisture beginning to work back into the area. And so the middle and latter part of next week is actually looking very wet. Whether the tropical system develops into a named storm or not, we're still going to be looking at a lot of rain. Beginning Tuesday, I think especially Wednesday into Thursday, we're going to be looking at probably the most rainfall. So enjoy the next couple of days of dry weather. Tomorrow is looking pretty dry for the most part. Monday's not looking too terrible, but we're going to get back into this wet pattern as we get into the middle and latter part of next week, regardless of whether this storm actually develops. This is the Weather Prediction Center's excessive rainfall outlook, and you can see we are looking at the potential for some heavy rainfall as we get into Tuesday and Wednesday. This graphic here is for Tuesday. So we're looking at essentially a slight risk of flash flooding across parts of coastal southeast Texas, the remainder of the area in a marginal risk. As we head into Wednesday, you can see that slight risk expands across all of southeast Texas and southwest Louisiana, and even into parts of northern Louisiana. And we'll see how the storm eventually evolves, whether it's actually a named tropical cyclone or not at that point. But we're still going to be looking at, regardless, quite a bit of rainfall across the region. This graphic here shows us the probability of seeing more than 2 inches of rainfall across the region. You can see very, very high probabilities of that, 80 to 90% along and south of the I-10 corridor, generally 60 to 70% north of I-10 up to about Alexandria, and then it gets a little bit lower as we head into North Louisiana. Probabilities of greater than 4 inches of rain, we're looking at about a 50 to 60% chance along the coastline, about a 40% chance along the I-10 corridor, and then a 30% chance up towards Alexandria and interior parts of southeast Texas, Tyler, Jasper, Newton counties. And then we're also looking at the possibility of greater than 6 inches of rain, 30 to 40% near the coastline, and about a 20% chance of that kind of north of the I-10 corridor. So we're all going to be looking at a fairly significant rain threat setting up kind of Tuesday through Thursday next week, whether this storm actually develops into a tropical system or not. It's still going to be a very tropical air mass. So we could be looking at a named system. Generally, when we have relatively weak named systems, we tend to worry much more about the rain than we do with the wind. And we are going to be looking at a significant rain threat as we head into the middle part of next week. So taking a quick look at the 4-day outlook here, obviously pretty nice conditions for the next couple of days. But again, that flood risk is going to come back. Those rain chances really ramp up like we were talking about Tuesday through Thursday with the potential approach of a named tropical system. We'll see how that works out. So that's kind of what we have here this evening from the National Weather Service. I do realize that that's not a huge amount to go on, but this is a system that hasn't actually developed yet. So there's only so much I can show you in terms of actual detail of what to expect. Impacts across our area right now are mainly going to come in the form of rainfall. At least at the moment, we're not expecting a wind threat. We'll see if that changes. It very well could as the storm kind of gets better organized and we get a better idea of exactly where it's going and how strong it's going to be. But right now, the most important takeaway here is, one, it's going to rain a whole lot middle of the latter part of this week. Two, definitely want to continue to keep a very close eye on the forecast here in the coming days, because this is something that can develop and evolve fairly rapidly. We're looking at anything from a non-named, just tropical moisture air mass, all the way up to the potential for a hurricane. I'm not ruling out the possibility that this thing, kind of ramps up fairly quickly. Most conditions are pretty favorable for development in the southern and central Gulf of Mexico. So we've seen it before where we have these rapid spin-up hurricanes in just a couple of days or even less. So that is not out of the realm of possibility here as we go through the next couple of days. So definitely want to continue to remain aware of evolving forecasts over the next couple of days. Make sure to check back at least once a day, if not more often. We are going to do another one of these briefings tomorrow evening. At least that's the current plan. We may do another one earlier in the day if the Hurricane Center decides that the storm's getting better organized and they need to start what's called a potential tropical cyclone, which they'll do sometimes even before a cyclone actually develops, when it looks like it has the potential to impact land masses. The Hurricane Hunter aircraft are heading out tomorrow to investigate the system to see if there is a defined center of circulation and exactly where that is. That'll give the computer models a lot more data to work with. So don't be surprised if tomorrow, if you do see any of those computer models, they kind of shift one way or the other as that Hurricane Hunter aircraft data comes in, because the more data the computer models have to work with, the more accurate those forecasts can become. And usually you get a bit of a shift one way or the other when you get that extra data thrown into those computer models. So just something to kind of keep in mind with regards to that. I'm going to go ahead and we'll answer any questions. Went away. We'll answer any questions you have here over the next few minutes. Let me go ahead and back up here a little bit. We'll stop there while I check to see if you do have any questions. So feel free to shoot me a question here over the next few minutes if you do have one. I'm going to back up a little bit. Let me see what we got here. Christy says, can't we just enjoy the cooler weather? Ugh. Yeah, I would love to just enjoy the cooler weather. You think after we get that first cold front, hurricane season should be over, right? Sherry asks, so will there be too much rain and flooding to evacuate if need be? If we're going to have to evacuate, we're going to want to do it before the rain and flooding actually begins. So no, if we're going to be looking at an evacuation decision, that's going to come hopefully before Tuesday or Wednesday when we get the heaviest of the rainfall. That's still quite far off, but I think the biggest threat for heavy rain and flash flooding is going to be Wednesday into Thursday. So if an evacuation order was called Monday or Tuesday due to the storm really ramping up quickly, that's when it would happen before the flooding actually happened. Okay. Bryce asks, will the high pressure to the east be weaker, or how do you think it does with the steering of the storm? Like we talked about earlier, we are going to be looking at an area of high pressure over the eastern Gulf of Mexico. Let me see if I can get back to graphic here. And that's what we were talking about a little while ago. Yeah, this is going to be an area of high pressure. You can see it extends roughly about to there-ish. If this is weaker, will that necessarily drive the storm one way or the other? What it's more likely to do is actually slow the system down. The stronger your high pressure is, just in terms of pressure, the faster you tend to get some storms rotating around it. So what it may wind up doing is if it's a little bit weaker, you may be looking at a little bit slower moving storm, which would be certainly bad news from a rainfall threat. But essentially what we're going to have here, the diameter of the high pressure system is not as big of an issue with this because we also have that cold front over the northern Gulf, and this disturbance is going to be moving north just in response to that, if nothing else. So that's going to be, I think, the bigger driving factor here. Teresa says, thanks, Donald. Here's a potato for you. Thank you for the potato. Okay, let's see. Amanda says, after we had such a beautiful day, too. It was a beautiful day out there, wasn't it? It's about as good as we get for early September. Lori says, you mentioned that the cold front is stationary, so that helps keeps this storm cluster away from us. No, not exactly. What happens is a cold front itself is actually an area of low pressure. So think of this as just kind of like an elongated area of low pressure. Okay. Now, the storm itself is also an area of low pressure down here. So just call it, and then we've got our high pressure area over here. So if you think about this, and I like to use this analogy a lot, in terms of mountains and valleys. A mountain or a high pressure area is kind of like a mountain. A low pressure area is kind of like a valley, and your winds running around it are kind of like the water that goes around it. So what's going to happen is that the low pressure system is going to be moving around the area of high pressure and actually into the other area of low pressure that is the cold front. So that's why we're going to be looking at it moving. It's moving essentially along the path of least resistance. So the cold front itself is not going to prevent the storm from getting through the area. Because if the cold front was actually digging further south, it would pick it up and push it off to the northeast. But it's not. It's just sitting here. And it's going to continue to just sit here for several days. So rather than picking this storm up and pulling it off to the northeast, it's more likely just to continue straight north into it. Okay, at least that's the current thinking. Now, it's possible if the cold front were to drift a little bit further south, it could begin a northeasterly turn. And that's what I'm talking about when I was saying don't rely on those individual computer models, because there's still a lot of uncertainty here with regards to how strong is the storm going to be. That has a big impact on the steering currents. Where is that cold front going to be? Where is that high going to be? And we're talking about a storm that hasn't even developed yet. So there's still a lot of uncertainty with regards to where the storm is going to wind up. The only thing that we can say with a fair degree of certainty is that it's going to drift to the north. Okay, it's going to drift to the north for at least the next couple of days. Now, does it clip off to the northeast after that? Possibly. Does it stay a little bit further to the west and potentially impact our area? That's certainly a possibility too. John said, hey, did anything exciting or interesting happen in Lake Charles today? We blew up a big building. They blew up Capital One Tower this morning, and we were joking earlier that maybe the Mother Nature noticed and reminded her that we were here. Is there any chance this hurricane could be named Hurricane Spaghetti? I'm gonna say no. The next name on the list is, I think, Francine, if I'm not mistaken. It's the F storm. Anna Yasni? Am I saying that right? I don't know. You're asking, when do you expect the tropical storm to arrive here? If it is a named tropical system, we'll probably be looking at, and in order to move into our area, we'd probably be looking at it at least or somewhere in the time frame of Wednesday or Thursday. For if we were going to have a named tropical system and it was going to make landfall, that's probably when it's going to happen. Ann asked, what about the surge on the coast in southwest Louisiana? It's too early to talk about surge. That's going to be extremely highly dependent on whether the storm actually develops, how strong it gets, and the exact track that it winds up taking. If it winds up tracking further to the east, say southeast Louisiana or coastal Mississippi, those areas, the storm surge would be none, essentially, because it would be on the west side of the storm. If the storm were just to remain a very weak tropical depression but move into our area, we'd probably have some minor, maybe 2 to 3 feet of surge right along the immediate coastline. If the storm were to intensify more and we look at the direct impact, we'd be looking at more significant surge. So unfortunately, it's just too early to say with a storm that hasn't even developed yet what kind of surge we could potentially be looking at. Sarah asks, could this rapidly intensify like Laura did? Not ruling out the possibility of rapid intensification. We'll just have to see exactly what the conditions are as the storm begins to get better organized. I'm not sure that the conditions are favorable enough for a rapid intensification. at least not what we're looking at right now, but steady intensification is not out of the realm of possibility. Sherry says, this is the price we pay for a smudge of fall weather. Yep, this early in the season, that's about right. You know, a lot of times when we get these early season cold fronts, these are the ones we watch for possible tropical development. Now, that's not what's happening here, but a lot of times when we get an early season cold front that's just sitting out over the Gulf of Mexico, sometimes those can spin up into tropical systems all on their own. Keela is asking, do you have any guess on how much strength it could possibly have before landfall? Right now, we're looking at anywhere from a non-named tropical system all the way up to a hurricane. It's just too early to say. Our computer models are generally favoring tropical storm strength at this point, but intensification into a hurricane is certainly not out of the realm of possibility either. Brenda says, can I go back to the percent rain chance for Tuesday through Thursday? Forward here. So there are your rain chances Tuesday and Wednesday. We're looking at anywhere between about a 60 to 80% on Tuesday and a 70 to 90% on Wednesday. As far as the amounts of rainfall, like we talked about a little while ago, we're looking at a very high probabilities of seeing more than 2 inches of rain during that Tuesday to Thursday time frame. We're still looking at pretty decent probabilities of 4 inches or more of rain, 40 to 50, maybe even up to 60%, depending on exactly where you are. And then not out of the realm of possibility for greater than 6 inches of rain, 20 to 40% chance of that. Now, this is also going to be very much subject to change depending on how the tropical system develops and exactly how it moves. Okay. Gabe wants to know, is this setup in the Gulf comparable to any other storm system in the past, reminiscent maybe of Humberto? Humberto is that's the scary one. That's the one that developed from nothing into a hurricane in about 24-ish hours, a little more than 24 hours. I have vague recollections of that one. At this point, it doesn't appear that conditions are quite favorable enough for that level of intensification, although we weren't expecting that to develop when it did. I personally can't think of another comparable storm right off the top of my head. I am not a hurricane historian. We do have people in this office who are, but I am not. But I'm not keen to do direct comparisons to say this is like that, because then people expect the exact same conditions, and that often winds up not being the case. So even if I knew, which I really don't, I wouldn't want to compare directly to another storm. Terry asked if we're getting hurricane snackies. Sure, go get some hurricane snackies. You might need them this week. So yeah, the next couple of days might be a good idea, or at least some heavy rainfall snackies. Brooklyn asked if it becomes a hurricane, what category will it be? Well, that's too early to say. Can't really answer that with certainty either. I don't expect it to become a major hurricane, at least not at this point, but becoming a hurricane is not out of the realm of possibility. It's just too early to say with any degree of certainty. Emily says, make sure your flood insurance is up to date. For the thing about flood insurance, though, is there's a 30-day waiting period if you don't have flood insurance before it actually takes effect. So even if you were to go out tomorrow and get flood insurance, it would not be valid for this particular storm. Timmy asks, will it come to Bossier or Shreveport? Possibly. I mean, I think you're certainly going to see some rain out of it, regardless of whether the storm tracks directly that way or not. This whole kind of stream, this whole plume of moisture is going to be moving gradually to the north. So I think all of the Gulf South is going to be looking at some significant rainfall as we go into the middle parts of next week. As far as whether you're going to see any other kind of impacts, that's going to depend on the exact track should it actually develop. Richard asks, thank you. Are you going to do another briefing tomorrow? Yes, we're going to plan to do another one at 7 p.m., but we will do another one earlier if the Hurricane Hunter aircraft finds a storm that's developed or if the Hurricane Center begins advisories on any kind of potential tropical system. So for right now, we're going to plan 7 p.m. tomorrow evening, but we will do it earlier if necessary. Amanda asked, what's my gut feeling? As a scientist, I don't listen to my gut. I listen to the data. that's, I mean, I know that sounds kind of corny, but that's what it is. You know, I look at data and I try to get a best case or a best solution based on that. Right now, based on what I'm looking at, I think it's kind of what we've been talking about. You know, I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. I think we're going to be looking at a storm that's going to be drifting to the north. We're probably going to be looking at impacts across our area, mainly in the form of rainfall. It wouldn't surprise me if we see some minor coastal flooding from a tropical storm. That's kind of my line of thinking right now, is we're probably looking at a tropical storm somewhere along the northern Gulf Coast, not necessarily right in our area, but somewhere either you know, kind of the northern Texas coast or anywhere across Louisiana, perhaps as far east as Mississippi or Alabama. At least that's my current thinking based on what I've seen so far. Wesley asked, what has been known to be the most reliable model? There's no single model that is universally reliable all the time. And that's why I say don't ever, you know, focus in on any kind of single model or single model run, because there's not one that's universally better than another, historically speaking. Sometimes in some conditions, one is better than another, but there's not one that's ever, you know, a go-to that we can always rely on to be the most accurate. That's just not how it works. All of them have different biases in different conditions. And we've got someone who's, of course, spamming up the comments. It wouldn't be a nice briefing if we didn't have some of that. Stephen's asking about Houston impacts. Again, that's going to be highly dependent on the eventual evolution of the storm, but I think the Houston area is also going to be looking at pretty widespread rainfall towards the middle to the latter part of next week. If we look at a storm that's moving nearly due north across, I mean, it's going to be close enough to the Texas coastline that I think at a minimum, Houston's going to be looking at some pretty good rainfall totals. There is a Weather Service office in Houston, so you can get more detailed information about their forecast on, they have social media pages as well. We don't specifically cover that area, but I do think you are going to be looking at some pretty good rain chances. Also, probably in the same kind of general time frame, Tuesday through Thursday. Can I remove the spammer? That's a good question. I'm not sure if I can do that from the page I'm on right now. You're going to have to ignore him. Tab says, will it move quickly at landfall with no Harvey possibilities? Right now, I think the fact that we have that cold front over us and high pressure, I think we are going to have a steering current. So I don't anticipate a really slow moving storm. Usually as a storm's moving into a frontal boundary, it tends to actually speed up rather than slow down. So I think that's probably the more likely scenario at this point. Brooklyn's asking about what about severe weather with this storm? The heavy rain and the potential for flash flooding is going to be the biggest concern. Right now, if we do see a developing tropical system, there's always a low-end risk of tornadoes. We saw that earlier this season with Beryl, and all the tornadoes did produced across parts of central and northern Louisiana, and even into parts of northeast Texas. And so that would certainly be a possibility if we wind up with a named storm, especially one that's intensifying. But I think the biggest threat, at least right now, is going to be the flash flooding and heavy rainfall potential. Liz says, Donald Jones, hi Liz. Liz is a friend of mine. Kathy says, so you should know a lot more tomorrow after the planes go in. Well, we'll know whether there is an identifiable center of circulation yet. which is a big if, just looking at the satellite. Then we'll also have a lot more information about the environment surrounding the storm, and that'll go into our computer models and help make them more accurate. Because out here in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico and the southern Gulf of Mexico, there's not a whole lot of data. We do have satellite data these days that fill in a lot of those gaps, but actually having a plane out there that can take measurements and drop sondes into and around the storm environment helps our computer models get a much better handle on what the atmosphere is like around it. So I don't know that we'll have a lot more information at that point, but I do expect an improvement in the forecast. And hopefully how the models are handling it as well. So yeah, I think by tomorrow we will have a better idea. I don't know about a good idea. Mitchell says, how often will I be doing live updates? Right now we are going to do one tomorrow evening. We will do another one earlier in the day if the Hurricane Hunter aircraft does find a closed circulation and the Hurricane Center starts advisories on it. And then if it looks like it's going to be a more immediate threat, we'll continue to provide more frequent updates, just like we usually do. A couple of people saying they just updated the probability to 80%. That wouldn't surprise me. They do provide an evening update. So my information may already be slightly outdated. I'm sorry. But yeah, the general idea is it's a very high probability of development here. Probably not immediately, but within the next couple of days or so. Randy asked, when should it begin to drift north? I think probably by late tomorrow into Monday, we'll start to see that movement more to the north. It's relatively stationary right now. June asked, will Lafayette get anything? Very high probability you're going to see a lot of rainfall at a minimum, whether the storm actually develops or not. You're going to be looking at fairly significant rainfall. Let me go ahead and move over to those graphics real quick. So this is our excessive rainfall probabilities for Tuesday. You can see you're in that marginal risk area over in the Lafayette area. For Wednesday, we actually expand that a bit further, and the entire area is in a slight risk. That's a higher categorical risk. Taking a look at the probabilities of seeing significant rainfall, you've got about an 80% chance of seeing 2 inches or more Tuesday through Thursday. You have about a 40 to 50% chance of seeing more than 4 inches, and you've got about a 20% chance of seeing more than 6 inches. So yeah, we're going to be looking at some significant rainfall totals over towards the Lafayette area at a minimum. And that's regardless of whether the storm actually develops or not. Tracy asks, how fast is it moving? Will it come through quickly, or do you think it will slow down? Like we talked about earlier, I think the fact that it's moving into a frontal boundary means that it'll probably begin to accelerate rather than slow down if it does approach the northern Gulf Coast. A frontal boundary is going to be providing kind of a pushing motion to it. So I think if anything, it'll probably be speeding up. Tammy asks, how about tornadoes? There is a tornado risk if the storm actually develops, as is the case with all tropical systems. We saw that, like we talked about earlier, in Beryl. But we actually have to have a fairly decent circulation before that actually occurs. So if the storm doesn't develop and it's just a mob of tropical air, then the tornado risk would be almost zero. But if we do have a named system that's moving inland, then there will be a tornado risk. Felix has all the good information. Fill your gas tanks and gas cans. Get your bottled water, batteries, sandbags when they come available. Mow your lawns. Get non-measured. That's a long laundry list of stuff, Felix. But you're not wrong. Lots of good information there. That's the preparedness activities kind of in a nutshell right there, and that's exactly what we should be doing right now. Felix would know. He was a former employee here at the Weather Service office. He retired last year.
and is no doubt having a better time than we are at the moment. Dolson asks, how warm is the Gulf? I have the Gulf sea surface temperatures actually right here in my briefing. Let's see where they are. Right there. So we're looking at anywhere between about 86 and 88 degrees Fahrenheit for the sea surface temperatures across pretty much the entire Gulf right now. It's actually a little bit warmer across the eastern Gulf, but this is a storm that's going to be developing in the western Gulf. So generally between about 86 and 88 degrees, which is certainly warm enough to support tropical activity. All right, I've reached the bottom of my my question list here. So if you do have a question, feel free to post it in there. You'll be first in line. Alexis asks, is there potential for pop-up tornadoes? Again, only if we see an actual developing system. If it doesn't and it just kind of moves across the Gulf as just a weak little area of disturbed weather, then the chance of tornadoes is essentially zero. But if we see an organizing tropical system, that tornado threat will go up. Because then we have more what's called vorticity embedded within the storm system, and that does have the potential to produce more tornadoes. Ricky asked, if the storm came in somewhat parallel with the coast around Bolivar, would the worst be in the Gulf? Yeah, initially, although as it's going to wind up making landfall somewhere. That's the thing about storms in the Gulf. Once there's a storm in the Gulf, it's got to go inland somewhere. So somebody's going to get the worst of it. It may be in the Gulf, east of Bolivar, but eventually it's going to get inland somewhere. Chrissy asks, what time will the hurricane hunters fly out? I don't have that information in my head at the moment, but I think it's probably around mid-morning, if I remember right. And by mid-morning, I think I want to say I saw somewhere around 10 a.m. Benjamin says, I'm late. Are we expecting a Category 1 or just a storm? We don't know that yet. We could be looking at anything from a tropical depression all the way up to a hurricane. So it's just too early to say with any certainty because, again, we're talking about a storm that hasn't actually developed yet. Is there the potential for it to reach hurricane strength? Yes, definitely. I think the more likely outcome is going to be a mid to strong range tropical storm. But, yeah, a hurricane, a Category 1 hurricane is not out of the realm of possibility right now. Katie asks, is this something to worry about, or is this going to be more rain than wind or anything? Right now, I think the rainfall is going to be the bigger threat. Now, if we do wind up on the higher side of that, and we're talking about a Category 1 hurricane, then yeah, wind will become a little bit more of a factor. But at least right now, I think the bigger threat is going to be the potential for the heavy rainfall and the flash flooding. Tim says, give Skywarn operators a shout out. Shout out to all the Skywarn operators. That was my idea right there. We certainly appreciate y'all and everything you do for us. Lucas says, Homewood, Sweet Lake, wind speed if possible. Not possible, unfortunately. We're 5+ days out. And so, again, talking about a storm that hasn't even developed yet, so I can't give you any kind of reliable wind speed numbers. Kelsey says, so if this storm does ramp up quickly, evacuations would be in the Monday, Tuesday timeframe if it were to happen that way. That's the most likely scenario, I would think, right now. We're not going to be looking at any kind of evacuations tomorrow, almost certainly not, unless this thing does something really stupid and unexpected. So Monday and Tuesday, if we were going to have any kind of evacuation orders, that is most likely when they would occur, yes. Patty says, it's been a minute. Is there a storm supply list floating around we can share? I don't have one off the top of my head. I'm sure you could Google it, or if somebody here has one that's readily available, throw it over to Patty. That's certainly a good thing to have on hand. Brenna asks, says, do you think it could be more than a Category 1? I think that's unlikely right now. I'm going to take a never say never approach, but I think that's pretty unlikely at this point. Brooklyn thinks I'm so funny. I am hilarious. Especially when it comes to hurricanes, you kind of have to laugh to avoid from crying or to keep from crying. Vicky asks, can it move more towards the east like New Orleans or Mississippi? Yes, that is certainly a possibility as well, especially as it's getting into this frontal boundary. That's not a good graphic to show you with, but that's along the northern Gulf Coast here. This is outdated now because this was when I first came on, but essentially there's a cold front right along the northern Gulf Coast here. It's the one that came through our area last night. And that's just going to kind of sit here for the next few days. So as this storm, whatever it becomes, gradually moves into it, I think it's probably going to begin to veer it off to the northeast. Now, exactly when that interaction begins to occur is going to have a very large impact on where the storm eventually makes landfall, should it actually turn into something that does make landfall. So yeah, if this were to move a few miles further south and that interaction happens a little bit sooner, you may get a clip off to the northeast a little bit faster. And the New Orleans area, the Mississippi area, certainly would be a possibility for a landfall location in that situation. Front desk says, looks like Pensacola is in the clear, but if it goes more east, we could get some bad weather. Yeah, you're not in the clear at this point. No, I would not go so far as to say that. Anywhere along the northern Gulf Coast or coastal portions of Texas should continue to keep an eye on this. I wouldn't say anybody is in the clear right now. Texas Scratchman says, is the window still open for models to shift back more west again? Yes. Very much so. Like we talked about, I mean, you probably weren't watching at the beginning of our broadcast here, but there is no center of circulation right now. So computer models are really struggling to get an idea on where the storm is, let alone where it's going to wind up going. So yes, computer models are still very much subject to change here over the next couple of days. Steven says, if it hugs the Texas coast as it moves northward, would that limit strength? By the way, say hello to my friend Lance Escada. He's out here in our operations area this evening, actually. As long as the center of circulation remains over the water, it'll still have the potential to intensify. Now, if it's right along the coastline, that would tend to slow development somewhat. But as we learned with several systems, including Harvey, once that center of circulation is out over open water, even if there are bands that are moving inland on the west side of it, it will still have the potential to intensify. Kathy says, I'm hearing 10 to 12 inches in Beaumont. Does this storm have the potential to produce more rain? It does have the potential to produce a lot of rain. I don't want to get into too much specifics as far as exact rainfall totals. They tend to never work out well that way, which is why I've been showing these probability graphics. I'm going to pull them back up here again for you. So there's a very high probability that we're looking at least or greater than 2 inches of rainfall for the Beaumont area Tuesday through Thursday. Still a pretty high probability, a 60% chance of seeing more than 4 inches of rainfall Tuesday through Thursday. And there's still about a 40% chance of seeing more than 6 inches of rainfall Tuesday through Thursday. So that's kind of what I'm using instead of saying you're going to get, 10, 12 inches of rain, something along those lines. That never actually works out very well. What we're giving you instead is some probabilities of seeing more than a certain amount of rainfall. And so, yes, at a 40% chance of seeing more than 6 inches of rainfall, we are going to be looking at a lot of rain with the potential for flash flooding. And again, this is regardless of whether the storm actually develops into a named system or not. Even just the tropical moisture associated with all of this activity is going to have the potential to produce heavy rainfall. Kathy says, if it's a tropical storm, then maybe we don't have to evacuate and probably won't lose power, so we could stay home. If it's a tropical storm, there probably won't be evacuation orders issued for anywhere that is off the immediate coastline, so Cameron and perhaps coastal Vermilion parishes, or coastal portions of Lower Acadiana as well. As far as losing power, there's still the possibility of some power loss due to what will probably be a whole lot of heavy rainfall that we just talked about. And even if we have some wind gusts 30, 40 miles an hour, that's often enough to knock some tree branches onto some power lines. We're getting way ahead of ourselves with regards to that, though, at this point. But the bottom line is if we're looking at a tropical storm, we're probably not going to see evacuation orders issued for most areas. But that remains to be seen. Or we ask, which side is the worst side to be on in a hurricane? Generally speaking, the east side or the right side tends to be the strongest in terms of wind and in terms of potential tornadoes and in terms of potential storm surge and even flooding for the most part. So yeah, the right side of a storm or the east side of the storm is often the worst side. Not always. There have been instances where we have lopsided storms where the west side is the worst side. But in most cases, the east side or the right side is the worst. Jason asked, so will this be a tropical storm? Right now, there is an 80% chance that it will be at least a tropical depression, if not a tropical storm. And there is still the possibility that we could have a hurricane on our hands, too. Paul asked, what do you expect the weather to be on Friday? Still probably wet. We're still looking at pretty good rain chances all the way through the end of the week. If the storm gets out of here, we may have a little bit of drier air. But again, we're talking day 6, day 7. That's kind of still up in the air a little bit. So I wouldn't necessarily to hang a lot of hats on that. We're going to be looking at rainfall, I think, lightly, at least through Thursday night. May linger into Friday. So I prepare for rain on Friday right now, but continue to keep an eye on the forecast here. All right, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up here for the time being. We've been going on for almost an hour here for this storm that doesn't even exist yet. Again, we are going to provide another update tomorrow evening. We will have updates earlier if the storm decides to get itself better organized overnight and into tomorrow, or if the Hurricane Center decides to begin initiating advisories on it. We'll have an update for you at that time. Otherwise, we will see you back here again 7 p.m. tomorrow evening for an update at that time. In the meantime, everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening. Step outside and go enjoy the slightly drier first taste of fall while we have it. It's going to last about another 24-ish hours, and then the humidity's coming back. So enjoy it while you can. Everyone have a wonderful rest of your evening. We'll talk to you again tomorrow.